Grace Mitchell had worked for 7 years at the Monarch, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan, without ever receiving a single complaint about her service. At 27 years old, she knew every corner of the establishment and was respected by both colleagues and management for her dedication and flawless professionalism. She carried scars that no one could see, the weight of her parents' death 3 years ago, the mountain of medical debt from her mother's cancer treatment, and the responsibility of raising her 14-year-old brother Noah all by herself. Every shift she worked, every tip she earned, went toward keeping Noah in his private school, where he studied on a partial scholarship, dreaming of becoming a doctor someday. It was during the Thursday evening gala that everything changed. Eleanor Blackwood, mother of the notorious Nathaniel Blackwood, walked into the restaurant with her circle of elite friends. Everyone in New York knew the Blackwood name, whispered about their empire of hotels and businesses, though few dared to speak openly about the darker power that family truly held. From the moment Eleanor sat down, she began making venomous remarks about the service, her voice rising deliberately so other guests could hear her criticisms. "This table is set incorrectly," Eleanor complained, while adjusting the silverware that was already perfectly aligned. "And where is the bread? We have been sitting here for 5 minutes." Grace approached with a professional smile, carrying a basket of warm artisan bread fresh from the oven. "Good evening, madam. I apologize for the delay. Here is your bread just out of the oven." Just out of the oven, Eleanor picked up a piece and examined it as if it were something disgusting. Hard as a rock. They cannot even make proper bread in this place. Eleanor's friends laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable with their host's behavior. Grace maintained her composure as she always did in difficult situations. "I can bring a different selection if you prefer. We have many options." "No need. Seeing this incompetence has already ruined my appetite." Eleanor pushed the basket away forcefully. Grace picked up the basket without showing any irritation, though she felt the curious stares of surrounding guests. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this woman's attitude went far beyond ordinary impatience. Throughout the dinner, Eleanor continued finding fault with everything. The soup was too salty. The wine was not at the correct temperature. The forks had imaginary stains. Each complaint grew louder, each remark more cutting. This waitress clearly was not trained properly, she told her friends, but loud enough for Grace to hear. "I wonder how she still has a job here." Grace felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but continued serving the table with professionalism. She needed this job desperately. The situation escalated when Eleanor deliberately spilled red wine on her own expensive white Chanel dress. "Look what you did," she screamed, pointing directly at Grace. "You clumsy fool. You pushed me." "Madam, I was standing on the other side of the table," Grace replied calmly but firmly. "I did not touch you at all. How dare you call me a liar?" Eleanor stood up dramatically. "This dress costs more than your entire year's salary." The other guests stopped eating to observe. Silence fell over the main hall, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware and interrupted whispers. Richard Porter, the restaurant manager, appeared immediately with obvious tension on his face. He understood the importance of the Blackwood family, knew what they were capable of, knew that crossing them meant consequences no one wanted to face. "Mrs. Blackwood, please calm down. We will resolve this immediately." "Grace, apologize to her now," Richard said with a trembling voice. Grace looked at the manager in disbelief. 7 years of honest work, and he was asking her to apologize for something she did not do. "Mr. Porter, you know I did nothing wrong." She spilled the wine herself. "Grace," his voice came out higher than intended. "Apologize now, or you are fired." Eleanor smiled triumphantly, crossing her arms with an air of victory. This was exactly what she wanted, to humiliate this woman in front of everyone. "I am waiting." Eleanor tapped her foot on the marble floor. "A public apology for your incompetence." At that exact moment, something inside Grace shattered, not from the humiliation itself, but from the blatant injustice of the situation. She had dedicated 7 years of her life to this place, treated every customer like family, and now she was being forced to lie to protect the ego of a spoiled woman who believed her wealth and her family's dark power made her untouchable. She looked at Eleanor's main course, grilled salmon with vegetables and the house special sauce, and made a decision that would change her life forever. "You want an apology." Grace picked up the plate with both hands. "Here is my apology." And she poured the entire contents over Eleanor Blackwood's head. The sauce dripped down the perfectly styled platinum hair. Vegetables scattered across the silk-covered shoulders. Pieces of salmon stuck to the expensive diamond necklace. Eleanor stood frozen for several seconds, too shocked to react. The entire restaurant fell into absolute silence. Even the other servers froze mid-motion, plates suspended in the air, eyes fixed on the surreal scene unfolding before them. No one had ever dared to challenge the Blackwood family like this, and everyone knew there would be consequences. If you are enjoying this story, tap the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe to our channel so you do not miss what happens next. Your support means everything to us. What Grace did not know was that Nathaniel Blackwood himself was about to watch this video, and his reaction would be nothing like anyone expected. Then Eleanor exploded. Her scream ripped through the silence like thunder in a quiet night. "How dare you do this to me?" Eleanor howled as sauce kept running down her face, dripping from her chin onto her expensive diamond necklace. "I'll ruin you. I'll sue you until you don't have a single cent left. Do you know who I am? Do you know what my family can do to you?" She swung toward Richard Porter with a crazed stare. "Call the police right now. I want this girl arrested. I want her in jail. I'll take this restaurant to court. You'll be shut down. Every one of you will pay." Richard Porter stood there trembling like a leaf before a storm, his face whiter than the tablecloth, his mouth moving but no words coming out. Eleanor's friends jumped up in a panic, trying to wipe sauce and vegetables off her with white napkins. But Eleanor slapped their hands away. "Don't touch me!" she screamed, her eyes locked on Grace, blazing with fury. Grace stood there with a strange calm. The storm had passed, and now she felt an odd, quiet peace spreading through her chest. Slowly, she untied the white apron she'd worn for 7 years, folded it carefully as if it were a sacred ritual, then set it down on the table beside the sauce that was still spreading. "Mrs. Blackwood," Grace said, her voice clear and steady over the guests' whispers. "You can sue me. You can destroy my career. You can use your family's money and power to do anything you want, but there's one thing you can't take from me. My dignity. I'd rather lose my job than kneel and apologize for a crime I didn't commit. For 7 years I've worked here. For 7 years I've treated every guest like family. And tonight I learned a lesson, that there are people who believe money can buy everything, even someone else's self-respect. But they're wrong." She turned to Richard Porter. "Mr. Porter, thank you for these 7 years, but I can't work in a place where I'm forced to lie to protect bullies." Then Grace turned and walked away, back straight, head held high, her steps steady across the gleaming marble floor. She didn't run, she didn't rush. Each step was a silent declaration of dignity no one could strip away. The guests watched her in silence, some with eyes full of admiration, some with worry for the fate of the young woman who had just dared to challenge one of the most powerful families in New York. Grace's heels clicked in an even rhythm, each tap like the heartbeat of a proud spirit that refused to bow. And in the darkest corner of the restaurant, where the chandelier light couldn't reach, a man had been watching everything from beginning to end. Marcus Chen sat there alone, a glass of whiskey in his hand, long forgotten. He was the right hand of Nathaniel Blackwood, assigned to keep an eye on his boss's mother whenever she went out, because Nathaniel knew all too well that his mother's temper could cause unnecessary trouble. But tonight, Marcus had witnessed something he'd never seen in 10 years working for the Blackwood family. An ordinary person, with no money, no power, no backing, had stood up to Eleanor Blackwood and walked away like a queen. Quietly, Marcus pulled out his phone. He'd recorded the entire incident from the moment Eleanor began to harass her. His finger slid across the screen as he sent the video to Nathaniel with a short message. "You're going to want to see this." Then Marcus stood, left a few bills on the table, and silently walked out of the restaurant, heading in the opposite direction from Grace. Behind him, Eleanor was still screaming about lawsuits and revenge, but Marcus knew the most important thing tonight wasn't her rage. The most important thing was the look in the girl named Grace's eyes when she stood up for herself. A look with no fear, no regret, only a flame Marcus had never seen in anyone who faced the Blackwood family. And he had a feeling Nathaniel would very much want to know about this woman. The moment Grace pushed through the glass doors of the Monarch and stepped onto the Manhattan sidewalk, the November night wind slammed into her face like a freezing slap. And suddenly, all the strength she'd just shown inside the restaurant vanished without a trace. Her legs started to shake. First a faint tremor in her knees, then spreading down into her calves, her ankles, until she had to grip a streetlight pole to keep from collapsing right there on the pavement. The adrenaline that had held her upright through her confrontation with Eleanor Blackwood drained out of her body, leaving behind a hollow space so empty it made her dizzy. Grace drew a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic rhythm of her lungs. What had she just done? She just dumped an entire plate of food over the head of the mother of one of the most powerful men in New York. She'd just thrown 7 years of her career into the trash in a single, impulsive second. Her hand shook as she fished her phone from her pocket, the screen lighting up to a wallpaper photo of Noah in his school uniform, his bright smile cutting into her heart like a blade. She tapped his number, each ring stretching like a century. Noah picked up on the third ring. "Grace, why are you calling so early? Aren't you done with your shift yet?" His voice came through, surprised, and Grace had to bite down hard on her lip to keep a sob from spilling out. "Noah, something happened at the restaurant. I'm coming home earlier than usual. Don't worry, I'll tell you when I get home." There was silence on the other end. Then Noah's voice returned, tight with concern. "Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm okay," Grace lied, forcing her voice into the most normal shape she could manage. "I'm just a little tired. Keep doing your homework. I'll be home soon." She ended the call before Noah could ask another question, because she knew if she heard his voice for even one more second, she'd cry right there on the crowded streets of Manhattan. Grace walked to the nearest bus stop, every step heavy as if she were wearing stones. She sat on the icy bench and watched yellow taxis glide past, pedestrians rushing by in thick coats, life continuing around her as if nothing had happened. But Grace's world had just collapsed. 7 years. 7 years she'd given to the monarch. 7 years of late nights and early mornings. 7 years of enduring difficult guests. 7 years of smiling even when she was exhausted to the bone. And now it had all dissolved into smoke because of one plate of salmon. The bus arrived. Grace climbed aboard like a machine, swiped her card, and found a seat at the back. She stared out the window, the city lights sliding by in blurred streaks, and in her mind the numbers began to line up. The rent for her studio in Brooklyn was due next week. This month's utilities still hadn't been paid. The medical debt from her mother's cancer treatment still had more than $50,000 left unpaid. Noah's private school tuition, even with a partial scholarship, still devoured nearly $1,000 a month. And now she didn't have a job. Worse than that, she'd just provoked the Blackwood family, a family that, according to the rumors, could make anyone disappear from this city if they wanted to. Who would dare to hire her after this? The news would spread. People in the restaurant world all knew each other, and no one wanted to hire an employee who had poured food over a customer's head, especially when that customer was Eleanor Blackwood. Grace felt her throat tighten. She'd fought to protect her dignity, but what was the price? What would happen to Noah? He was only 14. He dreamed of becoming a doctor. He needed a real education, and she'd promised her mother before she died that she'd take care of him properly. Tears began to slide down Grace's cheeks, and she quickly turned her face toward the window so no one would see. Had she been selfish? Had she put her own self-respect above her little brother's future? But then she remembered Eleanor's triumphant stare when she demanded Grace kneel and apologize. She remembered the humiliation of being forced to lie in front of dozens of people, and she knew that if she could choose again, she'd do the same thing. There were things you couldn't trade away, and dignity was one of them. The bus stopped near her apartment. Grace stepped down and drew a deep breath of Brooklyn's bitter night air. She didn't know what tomorrow would look like, didn't know where she'd find the money next week to pay the bills. But one thing she knew for certain. Tonight, she would have to face Noah and explain everything, and that might be the hardest thing she'd ever have to do. Grace pushed open the door to their tiny studio apartment, and the familiar scent of the vanilla candle Noah liked to light every night rushed into her nose. Noah was sitting at his desk by the window, but his books had been shoved aside, clearly unable to focus since the moment he'd gotten her call. The instant he saw Grace step inside, Noah sprang to his feet, his eyes sweeping her from head to toe as if searching for an injury. "Are you okay?" he asked at once, his voice thick with worry. "You said something happened? What happened? Did someone do something to you?" Grace looked at her brother, a 14-year-old boy who was already almost as tall as she was, his face still holding traces of childhood, but his eyes grown older too soon after the losses they'd had to carry. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook behind the door, then slowly sat down on the old sofa and patted the empty spot beside her. "Come sit with me," Grace said softly. "I'll tell you everything." Noah sat down next to her, his whole body taut like a drawn string. Grace drew a deep breath and began to tell him. From the moment Eleanor Blackwood walked into the restaurant with that arrogant attitude, the bitter remarks, the humiliation rising minute by minute, all the way to the moment Eleanor poured wine onto her own dress and blamed Grace for it. Grace told him how Richard Porter demanded she apologize, about the ultimatum that forced her to choose between her job and her self-respect, and finally, about the decision to dump the plate of salmon over the head of that powerful woman. When Grace finished, The room fell into silence. Noah sat there, lips pressed tight, his eyes darkening in a way Grace recognized immediately, the way he tried to hold his feelings down whenever he was angry or scared. "You lost your job," Noah said, not as a question but as a statement. "Yes," Grace admitted. "I lost my job, so what are we going to live on?" Noah's voice shook slightly. "Next month's rent, my tuition, and the hospital debt too." Grace felt her heart tighten as she listened to him list the financial burdens a 14-year-old shouldn't have to think about. "I'll find another job," she said, trying to keep her voice hopeful. "I've got 7 years of experience. Someone else will hire me." "But you made the Blackwoods angry," Noah said bluntly. "Everybody knows who they are. Nobody dares touch someone they hate." Grace didn't know how to answer, because he was right. But then Noah did something that took her completely by surprise. He turned to look straight into her eyes, and instead of blame or fear, something else lit up in his gaze. "You did the right thing," Noah said, his voice so firm Grace had to blink in shock. "She had no right to treat you like that. Nobody has the right to make you kneel and apologize for something you didn't do." "Noah," Grace started, but he cut her off. "Do you remember what Mom used to say?" Noah asked. "Mom always said money can be lost and earned again, but once you lose your self-respect, you never get it back. She said you can be poor, but you can't ever be cowardly." Tears began to gather at the corners of Grace's eyes when she heard him speak of their mother. She remembered the times their mother lay in her hospital bed, her body thin from chemotherapy, and still she'd told them they had to live with decency. They had to keep their heads high no matter how hard life got. "I'm scared I was selfish," Grace whispered. "I'm scared that because of my dignity, you'll have to suffer." Noah shook his head hard. "I'd rather quit school than let you be humiliated like that," he said, his voice catching. "I'd rather get a part-time job. I'd rather eat instant noodles every day. I'd rather do anything than watch you bow your head to someone like her. You're the one who's raised me these past 3 years. You're the one who's sacrificed everything for me, and I'm proud of you. I'm proud that my sister isn't the kind of person who submits to injustice." Grace couldn't hold it in anymore. She pulled her brother into her arms, holding him tight as if she was afraid he might disappear. Noah hugged her back, his shoulders trembling, and Grace realized he was crying too. The two of them sat there in their tiny apartment, holding each other in the late Manhattan night. Outside the window, the city lights that never went out. They didn't have much money. They didn't have power. They didn't have backing. But they had each other. And in that moment, Grace realized that was all she needed. "We're going to be okay," she whispered into his ear. "I don't know how, but we're going to be okay." Noah nodded in her arms. "I believe you," he said. "And if the whole world turns its back on us, we'll still have each other." That night, the two of them slept on the small sofa, like those first days after their mother died when they couldn't bear the loneliness of their separate rooms. Grace didn't know that tomorrow morning, her life would change in a direction she never could have imagined. Morning sunlight slipped through the gap in the worn-out curtains and pulled Grace from her restless sleep on the sofa. Noah was still curled up beside her, his steady breathing the only sound in the quiet apartment. Grace gently eased his arm off her, got up to make a cup of coffee, and tried not to think about the reality waiting for her. Right then, her phone buzzed hard, the screen flashing the name Diane, her closest coworker at the Monarch. Grace hesitated for a second, then answered. "Grace, oh my God, Grace, are you on social media right now?" Diane's voice came out breathless, like she'd just run a marathon. "You have to look. Your video is everywhere." "What video?" Grace asked, her heart starting to pound faster. "Last night's video," Diane nearly shouted. "Someone recorded the whole thing and posted it online. It's gone insanely viral. Millions of views overnight. The Brave Girl hashtag is trending #1 on Twitter." Grace nearly dropped her phone. She hurried to open her social media app and couldn't believe her eyes. The video of her dumping food over Eleanor Blackwood's head already had more than 5 million views, and the number was still climbing by the second. Comments flooded in like a waterfall. Messages from strangers pouring into her inbox without stopping. "You're a hero," one person wrote. "Finally, someone had the guts to stand up to arrogant rich people." "I'd do the exact same thing if I were in her situation," someone else commented. "Dignity isn't for sale." But not everyone was on Grace's side. "She's unprofessional," one account wrote. "No matter how difficult a customer is, a server has no right to act like that. She deserved to be fired. She'll never find work in this industry again." Another person sneered. The public split into two clear camps, arguing fiercely under every post. The ones who supported Grace praised her as a symbol of standing up against class injustice. The ones who opposed her said she'd acted thoughtlessly and destroyed her own career in a stupid, impulsive moment. But whichever side they chose, everyone agreed on one thing: this girl had real nerve. Grace scrolled farther, and her heart stuttered when she saw comments mentioning the Blackwood name. "She's dead for sure," someone wrote. "Does she even know who the Blackwoods are? They're not the forgiving type. She touched Nathaniel Blackwood's mother." Someone else wrote with a skull emoji. "Pray for her." The story wasn't spreading only among ordinary people. In places where the media spotlight didn't reach, in VIP rooms of high-end nightclubs, in closed-door meetings of the underground business world, the tale of the waitress who dared to challenge the Blackwood family traveled from mouth to mouth like a legend. "Did you hear?" a casino boss murmured to his partner. "Some girl dumped a whole plate of food over Eleanor Blackwood's head, right in the middle of the restaurant, in front of 100 people. "That's crazy," the partner said. "Doesn't she know who Eleanor's husband used to be? Doesn't she know what her son is holding in his hands? Or maybe she does and she still did it." The casino boss took a sip of whiskey. "And that's even scarier." In New York's underworld, recklessness was respected, but blind recklessness was despised. And nobody knew which kind this waitress named Grace Mitchell was. Some people bet she'd disappear within a week. Some people bet the Blackwood family would make an example of her to warn anyone who ever dared to oppose them. But everyone agreed that no matter how it ended, this was the first time in decades someone had dared to publicly humiliate a member of the city's most powerful dynasty. Grace sat there on her cheap kitchen chair, staring at the phone in her hand as if she were watching someone else's life. She didn't want fame, didn't want to become the center of a social media war. She only wanted to be treated like a human being with dignity. But now it was too late. The whole world knew her face, knew her name, and most important of all, the Blackwood family knew too. Noah woke up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What are you watching?" he asked. Grace didn't know how to answer. She didn't know that somewhere else in the city, in the penthouse at the top of Blackwood Tower, a man was watching that video again and again, with an expression no one could possibly read. The penthouse on the highest floor of Blackwood Tower looked down over all of Manhattan like a king surveying his kingdom. Early sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass, lighting up a vast space furnished with expensive, dark-toned pieces and art worth millions of dollars. Nathaniel Blackwood stood before the wall of glass with his back to the room, holding a cup of black coffee with no sugar. He was only 36, yet he already held an empire his father had spent a lifetime building. Tall, broad-shouldered, black hair slicked neatly back, a sharp-angled face with a jawline that looked carved from stone, and eyes the color of cold gray winter storms. In the legitimate business world, people knew him as a brilliant businessman who owned a chain of 5-star hotels and high-end real estate. But in the underworld, the name Nathaniel Blackwood made even the toughest men lower their heads. He wasn't like his father. He didn't like displaying power through violence. He preferred silence, calculation, and waiting. His enemies often didn't know they were dead until it was too late. A knock sounded at the door. Nathaniel didn't turn, but he knew exactly who it was. "Come in, Marcus," he said, his voice low and flat, like a lake without a ripple. Marcus Chen stepped inside, his black suit flawless as always, his expressionless face the result of more than 10 years working at Nathaniel's side. "Boss, I've got something," Marcus said, moving to the glass table and setting his phone down. "I sent you this video last night, but you probably haven't watched it yet." Nathaniel turned, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "What video?" "About your mother," Marcus replied. "Something happened last night at the Monarch." Nathaniel set his coffee down, walked to the table, and picked up the phone. He pressed play, and the room fell silent as the video ran. Nathaniel watched from beginning to end without saying a word, his face giving nothing away. When the video ended, he didn't speak. He just dragged the slider back to the start and watched again, and again, and again. Marcus stood quietly, watching his boss with curiosity he kept carefully hidden. He'd braced himself for rage, for orders of revenge, for a command to find that reckless waitress and ruin her life. But none of that happened. Instead, on the 5th viewing, Nathaniel suddenly paused the video at a specific moment and zoomed in. It was the instant right before Grace lifted the plate, when she looked straight into Eleanor's eyes without a trace of fear. "What do you see in her eyes?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence for the first time. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He kept staring at the screen, at the eyes of a stranger daring his mother, daring his entire family, daring everything this world believed no one would ever touch. And then something happened that Marcus never thought he'd see. Nathaniel smiled. Not the cold smile he used when facing enemies, not the polite smile he wore for business partners, but a real smile, the corner of his mouth lifting with something like amusement, even admiration. "She isn't afraid," Nathaniel said, and his voice carried a note Marcus had never heard before. "My mother threatens her. The manager threatens to fire her. The whole restaurant is staring at her, and she isn't afraid. Even knowing who our family is, she still stands straight and does what she believes is right." Marcus nodded. "She's either very brave or very crazy, or both," Nathaniel said. And he liked that. He liked people who wouldn't bow. All his life, Nathaniel had watched people kneel before the Blackwood family's power. Politicians, businessmen, the ones the public called powerful, all of them lowered their heads in front of a Blackwood. He was used to fear in other people's eyes, used to flattery and obedience. And he hated it, hated the falsehood, hated cowards hiding behind masks of respect. But this girl who was only an ordinary waitress with no money and no power, had stood up and done what none of those powerful people dared to do. "Marcus." Nathaniel set the phone down and looked his right-hand man straight in the eye. "I want to know everything about her. Full name, address, background, family, everything." "Immediately, boss," Marcus said. "But can I ask why? What are you going to do with her?" Nathaniel walked back to the window and looked down at Manhattan, small beneath his feet. "I don't know yet," he said. "But someone who can stand in front of the Blackwood family without trembling. That's the kind of person I want to meet. She's not like anyone I've ever seen, and that makes me curious." Marcus left to carry out the order, leaving Nathaniel alone in the vast penthouse. He reopened the video and watched one more time, this time focusing on the moment Grace stepped out of the restaurant with her head held high. There was something in the way she walked, in her calm in the middle of a storm, that wouldn't let him look away. And for the first time in many years, Nathaniel Blackwood felt something in his cold chest that he'd thought had died a long time ago. Nathaniel's phone rang less than an hour after Marcus left. He glanced at the screen, saw the word "mother," and knew immediately this call wouldn't be pleasant. He drew a deep breath and answered. "Nathaniel." Eleanor's voice came through sharp as a knife. "Have you watched the video yet? Have you seen what that employee did to your mother?" "I've watched it," Nathaniel replied calmly. "Then why are you still standing there?" Eleanor nearly screamed. "You need to find that girl. You need to ruin her. I want her to never be able to find work anywhere in this country. I want her to kneel and apologize to me in front of the whole world. I want her to learn the price of touching the Blackwood family." Nathaniel stayed silent for a long moment, long enough that Eleanor had to speak again. "Are you listening to me, Nathaniel?" "I am," he said, "and my answer is no." The silence on the other end stretched so long Nathaniel thought the call had dropped. Then Eleanor's voice returned, lower, more dangerous. "What did you just say?" "I said no, Mother," Nathaniel repeated, his tone still as calm as if they were discussing the weather. "I won't ruin her." Eleanor laughed, bitter and disbelieving. "You're protecting the employee who dumped food on your mother's head. Are you insane, Nathaniel? The whole world is laughing at me. That video is everywhere. Our family's reputation is being stained, and you're saying you won't do anything." "Our family's reputation, or yours?" Nathaniel asked. "Because from what I saw in that video, you started it all. You humiliated her all evening. You poured wine onto your own dress and blamed her. You wanted her to kneel and apologize for a crime you invented, and when she refused to submit, you called it an insult to the family." "Nathaniel Blackwood," Eleanor gasped, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that?" "I'm only telling the truth, Mother, and the truth is you went too far. I've looked the other way so many times when you treated servers badly. I've pretended not to see it when you humiliated people you thought were beneath you. But this time I can't, because that girl did nothing wrong. She was only protecting her dignity." "Dignity," Eleanor snorted with contempt. "A penniless waitress talking about dignity. What is she to stand beside our family? She's a human being, Mother," Nathaniel said, and his voice dropped a degree colder. "And that's what you seem to have forgotten a long time ago. You've lived in money and power for so long you've forgotten that the people who serve you are human too. They have families, they have dreams, they have self-respect. They're not objects for you to step on whenever you're bored." "You're putting a waitress above your own mother," Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking with outrage. "I'm putting what's right above what's unreasonable," Nathaniel replied. "And if you can't accept that, that's your problem, not mine." "Fine," Eleanor said, her tone turning threatening. "If you won't do it, I'll do it myself. I've got enough connections to turn that girl's life into hell without your help. I'll show her what it means to anger Eleanor Blackwood." "You won't do anything," Nathaniel cut in, and his voice shifted from calm to ice cold. "This isn't a request, Mother. It's an order. You won't touch her. You won't touch her family. You won't touch anything connected to her. And if you dare do the opposite of what I just said, you'll deal with me, not as your son, but as the head of the Blackwood family." The silence after that was heavy as lead. Never in all his 36 years had Nathaniel dared to speak to his mother in that tone. Never had he used his power to threaten her. And both of them knew something had changed forever between them after this conversation. "You'll regret this, Nathaniel," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "I don't know what spell that waitress has put on you, but I'll find out, and then you'll see I was right." She hung up before Nathaniel could answer. He stood there in the silent penthouse, staring down at the phone in his hand. He'd just chosen to protect a stranger instead of standing with his own mother. And strangely, he didn't regret it at all. 3 days passed like 3 centuries. Grace knocked on the doors of 17 different restaurants across Manhattan and Brooklyn, from places as upscale as the Monarch to small corner diners. The result was painfully the same every time. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. Managers looked at her 7 years of experience with impressed eyes, nodded at the positive feedback from her former coworkers, and acted ready to hire her on the spot. But then they asked for her name, and the moment the name Grace Mitchell left her lips, everything changed. Their eyes dimmed, their smiles vanished, and polite but final refusals spilled out as if rehearsed. "We'll get back to you," they said, but Grace knew no call would ever come. "The position has already been filled," they lied, even while the hiring sign still hung in the window. "You're not the right fit for our style," they said, without giving her a chance to prove anything. By the 17th restaurant, Grace didn't have the strength left to pretend she didn't understand what was happening. A kind manager at a small place in Queens finally told her the truth. "Miss Mitchell, I'm very sorry, but nobody in this industry dares to hire you. Your name is blacklisted. Everyone knows what you did to Mrs. Blackwood, and nobody wants trouble. That family can shut down any restaurant they want with one phone call. I've got a family to feed. I can't risk it. I'm sorry." Grace left that diner with legs that felt made of lead. She'd known this would happen. Noah had warned her that very night. But hearing someone say it to her face, that an entire industry had turned its back on her, still hit like a punch to the gut she hadn't been ready for. When she got home, Grace opened her savings book and stared at the number shrinking day by day. This month's rent was paid, but what about next month? The utility bill was already due. The medical debt payment would come in 2 weeks, and Noah's tuition for the next term had to be paid within a month. With what she had left, she could last about 6 weeks if she squeezed everything down to the bone. No eating out, no buying anything that wasn't necessary. But what came after 6 weeks? If nobody would hire her, 6 months or 6 years wouldn't change a thing. Noah noticed the change, even though Grace tried to hide it. He saw her get up at 5 every morning to go to interviews, saw her come back with red-rimmed eyes and a strained smile, saw her sitting at the kitchen table at midnight, staring at the pile of bills. But he didn't ask. He didn't want to add pressure. Instead, he quietly ate less at breakfast, lied that his school had a free lunch program, so he didn't need to bring food, turned off his bedroom light earlier to save electricity. He also secretly went online to look for part-time jobs for high school students, even though he knew Grace would never allow it. On the 3rd night, after Noah fell asleep, Grace sat alone in the dark and looked around their tiny studio apartment. It was the only place the two of them could call home after their parents died. Not big, not fancy, but theirs. The result of years of stretching every dollar until it hurt, and now she was considering selling it. If she sold the apartment, she could pay off the medical debt and still have enough money to rent a smaller room, enough to keep Noah in school while she tried to find a way through. But it would also mean giving up the last thing that connected them to their parents, giving up the memories of family dinners in that small kitchen, of her mother's laughter echoing through the living room, of her father's silhouette reading the newspaper by the window. Grace dropped her head onto the table, her shoulders shaking, not from crying, but from exhaustion. She'd fought to keep her dignity, but the price might be everything she had left, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. On the morning of the 4th day, Grace stepped out of the apartment with a new list of addresses in her hand, determined to try her luck farther away, maybe in New Jersey or Connecticut, places where the Blackwood name might not reach. She had just finished locking the door when she froze in place. A glossy black Maybach was parked right in front of her old building, standing out in the working-class neighborhood like a diamond in a pile of gravel. That kind of car cost at least $500,000, 10 times the value of the apartment she was considering selling. Grace's heart lurched when the car door opened and an Asian man in a flawless black suit stepped out. She recognized him instantly, even though she'd only caught glimpses of that face in online photos when she searched for information about the Blackwood family. Marcus Chen, Nathaniel Blackwood's right hand, the man who, according to rumors, had made an entire Bronx gang vanish in a single night. Grace took a step back on instinct, her spine pressing against the wooden door behind her. They came to take revenge. This was the ending she'd feared for 3 days. She thought of Noah inside, praying he wouldn't open the door no matter what he heard. "Miss Mitchell," Marcus said, his tone strangely calm in front of someone who was clearly terrified. "I'm not here to hurt you." Grace didn't answer. Her eyes flicked left and right, looking for a way out, even though she knew that if Marcus Chen wanted to do something to her, running would be useless. "I've got something for you," Marcus said, slipping a hand into his suit pocket. And Grace nearly stopped breathing, but what he pulled out wasn't a gun or a knife. It was a small black business card with gleaming gold lettering. He walked a few steps closer, then stopped at a respectful distance and held the card out to Grace. "Nathaniel Blackwood wants to meet you." Grace stared at the card as if it were a poisonous snake. "Meet me for what?" she asked, her voice coming out rough. "To threaten me in person, instead of over the phone. To tell me exactly how your family is going to ruin my life." "No," Marcus replied simply. "Mr. Blackwood only wants to talk." Grace let out a bitter laugh. "Talk," she repeated, with a sharp edge. "The son of the woman I dumped food on wants to talk to me. And you think I'm stupid enough to believe that?" Marcus didn't look offended by her tone. His face remained as calm as still water. "Miss Mitchell, if Mr. Blackwood wanted to hurt you, he wouldn't need to send me here with a business card. You're smart enough to understand that. The name Blackwood can open every door in this city, and it can close every door too, as you've seen over the last 3 days. Grace flinched at that last line. He knew where she'd interviewed, how many times she'd been turned away. They'd been watching her from the beginning. "So if it's not a threat, what is it?" she asked, her voice still tight with caution. "I don't know," Marcus answered honestly. "Mr. Blackwood didn't tell me why. He only said he wants to see you, and I was instructed to assure you this is an invitation, not a summons. You have every right to refuse." Grace looked into Marcus's eyes, trying to find any sign of deception, but she saw nothing except the professional indifference of someone used to keeping his emotions sealed. "If I refuse, then what?" she asked. "Then I'll leave, and you'll never see me again," Marcus said. "But Miss Mitchell, allow me to tell you one thing truthfully. I've worked for the Blackwood family for more than 10 years, and this is the first time Nathaniel has asked me to personally invite someone. Usually he doesn't care about anyone outside of business, but you seem to have made him curious, and Nathaniel Blackwood's curiosity isn't something that happens often." Grace took the card, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched its smooth, cold surface. The address printed on it was Blackwood Tower, the iconic Manhattan skyscraper she'd seen from afar 1,000 times but never once imagined she would step inside. "When?" she asked, surprising even herself by considering it. "Whenever you're ready," Marcus replied, gesturing toward the Maybach. "But if you agree to go now, I can take you there." Grace glanced back at the apartment door behind her, thinking of Noah still asleep inside, of the stack of bills on the table, of the blurred future waiting ahead. She had nothing left to lose. In truth, she'd already lost almost everything. "Fine," she said, and wondered whether she was stepping into the wolf's mouth or taking hold of a chance fate had thrown her. "Give me 5 minutes to text my brother." The Maybach glided smoothly through Manhattan streets, carrying Grace from working-class Brooklyn into the city's center of power in silence. Marcus didn't say a word for the entire ride, and Grace didn't have the mood to talk. She stared out the window at skyscrapers slipping past like a dream, and wondered what she was doing. When the car stopped in front of Blackwood Tower, Grace had to tilt her head back until her neck ached just to see the top. 72 floors of glass and steel rose into the sky like a massive sword, reflecting the bright sunlight so sharply it hurt to look at. This was the symbol of Blackwood power, a silent declaration that this family stood above everything. Marcus led her through the main lobby, where polished black marble floors reflected their shadows like the surface of a still lake. Employees in perfect uniforms bowed to Marcus as they passed, their eyes flicking toward Grace with curiosity carefully hidden. A private elevator carried them to the 72nd floor, and Grace's ears rang from the pressure changing too fast. When the doors opened, she stepped into a completely different world. The penthouse was as large as a whole field, with soaring ceilings and glass walls that looked out over Manhattan from above. Luxurious dark interiors, art worth millions of dollars, antiques. Grace was sure belonged in a museum more than a home. The air felt different here, heavier, as if the walls themselves were breathing out power and threat. "Wait here," Marcus said, then disappeared behind a heavy oak door. Grace stood alone, feeling like a small fish thrown into the ocean. She didn't dare sit on the expensive leather chairs, didn't dare touch anything, only stood still and tried to control a heartbeat that pounded like war drums. Then she heard footsteps. Nathaniel Blackwood stepped out from the door Marcus had just disappeared through, and Grace understood immediately why people feared him so much. It wasn't because he was frighteningly tall, though he stood nearly a head above her. It wasn't because his sharp, cold face looked carved from stone, though that alone could make anyone hesitate. It was his eyes. Gray eyes as cold as a blizzard, sharp as a razor, cutting straight through her as if reading every thought in her mind. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen too much, done too much, and no longer flinched at anything. "Miss Mitchell," Nathaniel said, his voice low and even, like water moving under ice. "Thank you for coming." Grace swallowed, forcing her voice not to shake. "I don't think I had many choices." "Mr. Blackwood." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, something flickering in his icy eyes, vanishing too fast for Grace to know what it was. "You had a choice," he said. "Marcus told you. This was an invitation, not an order." "Then why did you invite me here?" Grace asked bluntly, no longer patient for circles. "To tell me in person that you're going to ruin my life because I insulted your mother." Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He walked to the glass window and looked down at Manhattan, small beneath his feet, his back to Grace. "I've watched that video many times," he said, "and there's one thing I don't understand." "What?" Grace asked. "Why did you dare to do it?" Nathaniel turned back to face her. "You knew who my mother is. You knew what my family can do. You knew you'd lose your job and never find another in this industry. You knew all of that, and you still did it. Why?" Grace met those cold, gray eyes, and strangely, she didn't feel the fear she expected. Maybe because she'd already lost too much and had nothing left to fear. "Because I'm not an object for people to step on," she said, her voice clear and steady in the vast room. "Your mother may be rich, may be powerful, may make this whole city tremble, but that doesn't give her the right to humiliate me. It doesn't give her the right to make me kneel and apologize for something I didn't do. I may be poor, I may be just a waitress, nobody knows, but I'm still a human being, and my dignity isn't for sale, even if the price is everything I have." The room fell silent after her words. Nathaniel stood motionless, his eyes still fixed on her without blinking. But something was changing in that stare, a small crack in the thick ice he'd built for years. "You know," he said after a long moment, "all my life I've met thousands of people, politicians, businessmen, the ones the world calls powerful, and every one of them bows to my family. Every one of them is willing to sell their soul for a little advantage. But you, an ordinary waitress, dared to stand straight and say no. You dared to trade everything, just to keep something most people don't even realize they've lost. Self-respect." He paused, and what he did next caught Grace completely off guard. He smiled, not a cold smile, not a mocking one, but a real smile that made his sharp face look different all at once, younger, more human. "And that makes me curious about you, Miss Mitchell," Nathaniel said, very curious. That smile disappeared as quickly as it had come, and Nathaniel returned to his familiar cold expression. He walked to a black oak desk, took out a file, and set it down in front of Grace. "I have an offer for you," he said. Grace eyed the folder with undisguised suspicion. "What kind of offer?" "Do you know the Sterling?" Nathaniel asked. Grace nodded. Who in the restaurant world didn't know the Sterling? A 5-star restaurant inside the Blackwood Grand Hotel in the heart of Manhattan, where a single dinner cost what she used to earn in a whole month at the Monarch. "The current manager of the Sterling just resigned," Nathaniel went on. "I need someone to replace them, and I want that person to be you." Grace thought she'd misheard him. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Nathaniel Blackwood, the son of the woman she'd dumped food on, was offering her the manager position at one of the most luxurious restaurants in New York. Are you joking? She finally managed. I don't joke, Nathaniel replied, especially not about business. But why? Grace asked, her voice still full of doubt. I publicly humiliated your mother. That video is everywhere. My name is being blacklisted across the industry. And you want to hire me? It doesn't make any sense. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before he answered. You have 7 years of experience with a spotless record, not a single complaint. That's rare. And you have something I look for in a manager but rarely find. What? A spine, Nathaniel said. Someone who will stand up for what's right even when there's a price to pay. That's the kind of person I need. Someone who won't bow to unreasonable customers just because they're rich. Someone who puts standards and principles above money. The Sterling needs someone like that. Grace still didn't believe it. And what about your mother? She'll never accept this. My mother doesn't get to decide who works for me, Nathaniel replied, his voice cooling a degree when he mentioned Eleanor. This is my company, not hers. Grace looked down at the file, opened the first page, and nearly lost her breath when she saw the proposed salary. It was 5 times what she'd made at the Monarch, enough to pay off the medical debt within 2 years. Enough for Noah to keep studying without having to worry about money. Enough for the 2 of them to live a comfortable life she'd never dared to imagine. But she'd lived long enough to know there was no such thing as a free lunch. Especially when that lunch was offered by a Mafia kingpin. What do you want from me? Grace asked bluntly, meeting Nathaniel's eyes. Nobody gives anything for nothing, especially someone like you. So what's the real price? What do you want me to do in exchange for this job? Launder money? Cover illegal activity? Or something else I don't want to know about? Nathaniel didn't look offended by her directness. Instead, he seemed to reassess her all over again, his sharp gaze moving across her face as if searching for something. You really aren't afraid of anything, he said, and it was an observation, not a question. I've lost too much to be afraid of losing more, Grace replied. But I won't sell my soul. I'd rather stay blacklisted than get involved in anything illegal. If that's what you want, I'm sorry, you chose the wrong person. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if he'd found the answer he needed. Good, he said. Then here's our deal. You'll manage the Sterling like a normal restaurant. Fully legal, no laundering, no hiding anything. Your job is to make it the best restaurant it can be. Nothing more, nothing less. And my conditions, Grace said. I won't do anything that goes against my conscience. I won't mistreat staff no matter who the customer is. And if you ask me to do something I believe is wrong, I'll refuse, even if it costs me the job. Nathaniel's eyebrow lifted, as if he wasn't used to anyone setting terms with him. Are you negotiating with me? I'm protecting my boundaries, Grace replied. That's not negotiable. A tense moment passed, the 2 of them staring without blinking, like fighters measuring each other. Then Nathaniel laughed, a small sound from his throat, as if he couldn't quite help it. You really are different, he said. Fine. I agree to all your conditions. You'll have full authority to run the Sterling the way you believe is right. I won't interfere with daily operations, and if there's any problem, you can speak to me directly. He held out his hand. So do we have a deal, Miss Mitchell? Grace looked at that hand, the hand of a man all of New York feared, the hand that rumors said had done terrible things to his enemies. But she also saw the opportunity, the chance to change her life, and Noah's, a chance she wasn't sure would come twice. She reached out and took his hand. We have a deal, Mr. Blackwood. Nathaniel's hand was warm and steady, gripping hers just firmly enough to show seriousness, but not hard enough to hurt. And in the moment their hands met, Grace felt something shift, as if a new door had opened in front of her, leading to a road she couldn't see the end of. Call me Nathaniel, he said. Grace nodded. Then you can call me Grace too. The first 2 weeks at the Sterling were the hardest stretch of Grace's career. The staff watched her with suspicious eyes, some of them even whispering behind her back about the viral video and why Nathaniel Blackwood would hire someone like her. They thought she was the boss's lover. Or worse, a tool Nathaniel was using to punish his mother by deliberately hiring the woman she hated. But Grace didn't care about the rumors. She focused on the work, applying the philosophy she'd learned over 7 years at the Monarch and the lessons her parents had taught her when she was still a child. Everyone deserved respect, from the head chef to the dishwasher, from VIP guests to the cleaning staff. She met with every employee one-on-one, listened to their struggles, remembered their children's names, asked about their families. She changed schedules so the ones with small kids could pick them up on time. She increased break time between shifts, improved staff meals, and most important of all, she stepped in to protect her people from unreasonable customers. Once, a wealthy businessman, drunk on alcohol, shouted a young server to tears just because an appetizer came out 2 minutes late. Grace walked over and, calm but firm, asked him to leave the restaurant. When he threatened to call Nathaniel Blackwood, Grace smiled and told him to go right ahead, then personally escorted him to the door. The story spread through the restaurant like wildfire, and after that, the staff's attitude toward her changed completely. They stopped looking at her like an outsider who'd taken someone's place. They started looking at her like a real leader, someone willing to stand in front of them and take the hit. The Sterling's revenue climbed steadily week by week, not because of flashy marketing strategies, but because of the simplest truth. Happy staff served customers better, and customers who had a good experience came back. 5-star reviews flooded travel and food sites, people praising not only the cuisine, but also the warm, professional service. And Nathaniel Blackwood began to appear more and more often. At first, he came under the excuse of checking operations, sitting at his usual corner table with a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the way Grace ran the restaurant with that sharp, measuring gaze. But little by little, his visits lasted longer, and the reason of business checks quietly turned into conversations. Those conversations usually began after closing, when the staff had gone home and the restaurant sank into quiet darkness. Grace would pour herself a cup of coffee, pour Nathaniel a whiskey, and they'd sit across from each other at the table by the window overlooking Manhattan streets glittering with lights. They talked about everything, about work, about life, about different ways of seeing the world. Nathaniel asked about Noah, about how Grace had raised her younger brother alone for 3 years, about her parents and the medical debt she was still fighting to pay. Grace asked about the Blackwood Empire, about the weight of inheriting a powerful dynasty, about the loneliness she could see behind his cold eyes. What surprised Nathaniel the most was that Grace never feared speaking to him honestly. When he made a business decision she believed was wrong, she told him it was wrong. When he became arrogant or too cold, she pointed it out without hesitation. Once, Nathaniel complained about a partner who dared to reject his offer, his voice edged with threat, as if he were weighing the consequences that person would suffer. Grace set her coffee cup down and looked him straight in the eye. "People have the right to say no," she said. "Even when the one asking is Nathaniel Blackwood. Someone disagreeing with you doesn't mean they're insulting you. Sometimes it only means they have a different view, and a good leader listens to a different view instead of threatening the people brave enough to speak it." Anyone else who said those words to Nathaniel would have faced serious consequences, but with Grace, he only went quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right," he admitted, and it was the first time in his life Nathaniel Blackwood had admitted he was wrong in front of another person. Marcus Chen, who always stood in the corner whenever Nathaniel was present, watched it all with amazement he kept carefully hidden. He'd followed Nathaniel for more than 10 years, had seen his boss deal with enemies, partners, women who tried to get close for money and power. But he'd never seen Nathaniel like this, never seen his cold boss truly listen to someone, truly laugh at a clever remark, truly open himself about things he'd kept buried for years. Grace Mitchell was doing what nobody had ever done. She was touching the real man behind Nathaniel Blackwood's cold mask. And Marcus didn't know whether that was good or bad. But he knew one thing for certain. Everything was changing. And when everything changed around Nathaniel Blackwood, this whole city would have to change with him. One Friday night near the end of the month, Noah suddenly showed up at the Sterling. Grace was double-checking the weekend reservation list when the restaurant doors opened, and her 14-year-old brother walked in with his school backpack on his shoulder and that familiar bright smile. "Grace, I came to pick you up," Noah said. "I finished my exam early today, so I thought I'd surprise you." Grace was about to rush over and hug him when she noticed Nathaniel sitting at his usual corner table, a whiskey in his hand, those gray eyes watching Noah with open curiosity. Noah noticed the presence of the unfamiliar man too. He slowed mid-step, and his instinctive guard made him move closer to his sister. "Who's that?" "Grace." Grace drew a breath, unsure how to introduce him. "This is Nathaniel Blackwood, the owner of this restaurant," she said. "And this is Noah, my brother." Noah's eyes widened at the name, Blackwood. He realized at once this was the son of the woman Grace had dumped food on in that viral video. He looked at Nathaniel with a wary stare, his body going rigid as if he was ready to protect Grace at any moment. But instead of acting threatening, Nathaniel stood and walked over, his face softening in a way that felt unusual for him. "So this is the brother Grace talks about," he said. "She told me you want to become a doctor." Noah didn't answer right away, still measuring the man in front of him. Then he lifted his chin and looked Nathaniel straight in the eye with a courage that went far beyond his 14 years. Yes, I want to be a doctor so I can help people like my mom, people who don't have enough money to get treated the right way. Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, something flickering in those cold eyes. That's a noble goal, he said. And how are you doing in school? I'm top of my class, Noah answered without false modesty. I've got a partial scholarship at school, and I'll earn a full scholarship in college. My sister won't have to worry about me. Grace watched her brother, pride swelling in her chest. He'd grown up too fast in the last 3 years, had carried too much loss, and still held on to hope and determination. Nathaniel studied the two of them for a moment, then turned to Grace. You should go home with your brother, he said. I don't have anything else to discuss tonight. Grace nodded her thanks and led Noah out of the restaurant. On the way home, Noah stayed quiet for a long time before he finally spoke. The way he looks at you is different, he said. Different how? Grace asked. I don't know how to explain it, Noah shrugged, but I've never seen anyone look at you like that, like you're the most precious thing in the room. Grace didn't answer, but her cheeks burned in the dark. A week later, Noah ran home with a stunned expression. Grace, he shouted, the school called me into the office today. They said someone paid all my tuition through my high school graduation. They didn't say who, but they told me I don't have to worry about money anymore. I can just focus on studying. Grace knew immediately who it was. That night she stayed late at the Sterling, later than usual, waiting for Nathaniel to appear. When he walked in and took his usual table, she brought his whiskey over and sat across from him. Why did you do that? She asked straight out. Nathaniel didn't pretend not to understand. Because the boy deserves it, he replied simply. And because I can. I don't need charity, Grace said, her voice edged. It isn't charity. Nathaniel met her eyes. It's an investment. I invest in people I believe will do something meaningful. And Noah will become a good doctor. I'm certain of it. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need his help, but she looked into those gray eyes and saw something that made her fall silent. No pity, no attempt to buy her, only a sincerity she'd never seen in him before. Thank you, she finally said. Just 2 words, but carrying everything she couldn't turn into language. They sat there talking all night, longer than they ever had before. Nathaniel told her about his father, the previous Blackwood boss, the man who built the empire from nothing but also taught Nathaniel that emotions were weakness. He never hugged me, Nathaniel said, his voice dropping in the darkness. Never said he loved me. Only lessons about power and survival. And when he died, I didn't know if I was sad. I only knew I had to take over everything. I had to become the man he wanted me to be. Grace told him about her parents, about the happy years when their family was whole, about the shock of her mother's cancer diagnosis, about the sleepless nights in the hospital holding her mother's hand, about the car accident that stole both her parents' lives in a single moment, and about the scar on her wrist, a memory from an abusive relationship she had to escape before she finally found peace. When she pulled up her sleeve to show Nathaniel the scar, his eyes darkened in a dangerous way. Where is he? He asked, his voice like ice. You don't need to know, Grace replied. That's the past. I got through it. Nathaniel didn't say anything else, but his finger brushed the scar on her wrist, gentle as if he was afraid of hurting her. And in that moment, under the faint streetlight slipping through the glass, Grace saw something she'd never seen in Nathaniel Blackwood. Tenderness. They talked until the Manhattan sky shifted from black to purple to pink, until dawn flooded the restaurant and broke the darkness apart. And when they finally left, something between them had changed, an invisible thread linking 2 lonely hearts that had found each other in a city of millions. News that Nathaniel had hired Grace as the Sterling's manager finally reached Eleanor's ears. She learned it from Sophia Harrington, who had gone to the restaurant for dinner and immediately recognized that the waitress who'd gone viral online was now running the entire place. Sophia called Eleanor at once, her voice dripping with sarcasm and malice. Mrs. Eleanor, do you know what your son is doing? He didn't just hire that employee. He's been coming to see her almost every day. The whole city's gossiping that they're involved. Eleanor nearly smashed her phone when she heard. She'd told herself Nathaniel was only rebelling for a moment, that his interest in that waitress would cool with time. But this, not only hiring her but meeting her constantly, was beyond any limit Eleanor could tolerate. One Tuesday afternoon, when the Sterling was still quiet, the restaurant doors suddenly opened, and Eleanor Blackwood walked in. She wore a luxurious black dress, her platinum hair pinned up flawlessly, and every step in her expensive heels struck the marble floor like a warning. Grace was checking tonight's banquet tables when she froze at the sight of that woman. She recognized Eleanor instantly. That face had haunted her through too many sleepless nights after what happened at the Monarch. "So this is the little girl who's put a spell on my son," Eleanor said loudly, her voice echoing through the restaurant and making the staff preparing for the evening stop and stare. "I've got to admit, you're better than I thought. You didn't just dump food on my head. You climbed into my son's bed to secure your future." Grace felt heat rush into her face, but she held her anger down. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said as calmly as she could, "please leave my restaurant." "Your restaurant?" Eleanor laughed with contempt. "This is the Blackwood family's restaurant. My son's restaurant. And you're just a whore pretending to be a manager." A few employees stood open-mouthed in shock. Grace stepped closer, facing Eleanor head-on, and she didn't back up even 1 inch, even though the woman in front of her could ruin her life with a single phone call. "I'll say it one more time," Grace said, her voice clear. "Please leave right now." Eleanor took a step forward, her gaze vicious. "Who do you think you are?" Eleanor whispered, low enough that only Grace could hear. "Do you think Nathaniel truly cares about you? He's only using you to provoke me, and when he's tired of you, you'll be back to being the same penniless waitress you were before. But this time I'll make sure you never raise your head again. Not just you, your precious little brother too. I heard he's in private school dreaming of becoming a doctor. It'd be such a shame if something happened to that dream." Grace felt her blood turn to ice when Eleanor mentioned Noah. She could endure any humiliation aimed at her, but Noah was the line nobody was allowed to cross. "If you dare touch my brother," Grace said, her voice shaking, not with fear but with rage, "I swear to you." "What will you do?" Eleanor mocked. "Dump another plate of food on my head." The restaurant doors flew open, and Nathaniel walked in with a face like ice. Marcus came right behind him, clearly having alerted his boss the moment he discovered Eleanor was there. "Mother," Nathaniel said. Just one word, but it carried a storm. Eleanor turned to face her son, the smile on her lips never wavering. "Nathaniel, you came at the perfect time. I was talking to your employee." "Step outside and talk to me," Nathaniel cut in, his voice leaving no room for refusal. "Right now." Eleanor shot Grace one last threatening look before following Nathaniel out. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, and the argument exploded. "You've crossed the line," Nathaniel said. "I warned you not to touch her." "She's using you," Eleanor screamed. "I'm your mother. I'm protecting you." "You're protecting your wounded ego," Nathaniel replied coldly. "Grace isn't using me. She didn't even want to accept any help from me. She's the only person in my life who's dared to speak to me straight without fear. The only person who looks at me like a human being instead of a mafia boss or a walking check." "Then what am I to you?" Eleanor demanded, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "You're the person who's tried to control my life for 36 years, Nathaniel said bluntly. "You're the person who's never asked what I want, only cared about what I should become by your standards. And now that I've found someone who actually matters to me, you want to destroy it." Eleanor stood there stunned, hearing her son say it to her face for the first time in her life. "Listen to me, Mother." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dropping into a threatening whisper. "If you touch Grace or Noah, even a single hair, I'll cut you off completely. I'll strip your access to the family's assets. I'll make sure you have no influence left in this society. And you know I can do it. You know I don't make empty threats." Eleanor looked into her son's eyes, and for the first time in years, she saw absolute seriousness there. This wasn't Nathaniel in a moment of anger. This was Nathaniel who'd made a decision. "You'll regret this," Eleanor said. But the confidence she'd walked in with was gone. "No, Mother," Nathaniel replied. "The only thing I regret is that I didn't stand up to you sooner." He turned and walked back into the restaurant, leaving Eleanor alone on a Manhattan sidewalk. And for the first time in her life, she realized she could truly lose her son. Eleanor wasn't the kind of woman who accepted defeat. After the confrontation with Nathaniel outside the Sterling, she went home with her heart packed with rage and humiliation. Her own son had chosen a waitress over his mother, had threatened to cut her off because of a woman Eleanor considered unworthy of even a glance. Eleanor sat in the grand living room of her sprawling mansion, draining one glass of liquor after another, and in her drunken haze she made a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. She called Viktor Volkov, the boss of the Russian Mafia family, competing with the Blackwoods for power along the East Coast. Volkov and Blackwood had been at odds since Nathaniel's father's time, a cold war smoldering for years, with both sides waiting for the chance to land a fatal blow. "Victor," Eleanor said into the phone, her voice thick with alcohol. "I've got information for you. My son has a weakness. A waitress named Grace Mitchell, and her little brother. Nathaniel cares about them more than anything else. If you want leverage on my son, that's how." Eleanor didn't think about consequences, didn't think about the fact that she was betraying her own blood. She only wanted Grace gone from her son's life, at any cost. 3 days later, Noah vanished. The boy didn't come home after school the way he always did. Grace called his phone dozens of times, but all she got was the long, hopeless, ringing tone. She called the school. They said Noah had left at 3 in the afternoon as usual. She called his friends. No one had seen him after dismissal. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3, and Grace began to truly panic. She ran into the street, asking neighbors, street vendors, anyone who might have seen her brother. No one had seen anything. At 8 that night, Grace's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number arrived with a photo that made her heart stop. Noah was sitting on a wooden chair, his hands tied behind his back, his mouth sealed with tape, his eyes wide with terror. The message underneath read, "Tell your lover we want to talk. If the police show up, the boy dies." Grace collapsed onto the floor, her legs no longer strong enough to hold her up. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, trembling, staring at the image of her brother bound like an animal, and feeling the world crumble around her. For the first time in the 3 years since her parents died, Grace completely lost control. She didn't know what to do, didn't know who to call, didn't know how to save her brother from people who were clearly willing to kill. With shaking hands, she called Nathaniel. He answered after the first ring. "Grace." His voice came through, full of concern the moment he heard her ragged breathing. "What's wrong?" "Noah," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. "They took Noah. They sent me a picture. I don't know what to do. Nathaniel, please. I don't know what to do." "Where are you?" Nathaniel asked, his voice turning to steel in an instant. "At home. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming now." Nathaniel hung up and turned to Marcus with a look his right hand had never seen before. In those gray eyes there was no usual calm left, only a cold, ruthless fury waiting to be unleashed. "Volkov," Nathaniel said. "Just that one word." Marcus nodded. He'd suspected it the moment he heard Noah was missing. The Volkov family was the only rival reckless enough to touch someone tied to Nathaniel, and they had to have had an inside source to know about Grace and Noah. "Mobilize everyone," Nathaniel ordered. "I want to find where they're holding the boy within 1 hour. Contact every source we have. Promise them whatever money they want. And tell the men to be ready. There will be blood tonight." Marcus pulled out his phone and started making call after call. Within 15 minutes, the entire Blackwood underworld empire was on high alert. Enforcers were summoned from all over the city. Weapons were prepared. Vehicles were arranged. This wasn't a business operation or a negotiation. This was war. Nathaniel reached Grace's apartment in record time. He found her curled on the living room floor, phone in hand, eyes locked on Noah's photo without blinking. He crouched in front of her, gripping her shaking shoulders. "Grace, look at me," Nathaniel said softly but firmly. "I'm bringing Noah back. I promise you, no one touches what's mine and lives." Grace looked up at him, her eyes red but dry, as if she was too terrified to cry. "I can't lose him," she whispered. "Noah's all I've got left. If anything happens to him, I won't survive it." "You won't lose him," Nathaniel said, his hand cupping her cheek, his voice set like a nail driven into wood. "I'll make sure of it, even if I have to burn this whole city down." Marcus's phone rang. He listened for a moment, then turned to Nathaniel. "We found them," Marcus said, "an abandoned warehouse at the Brooklyn docks. There are at least 10 guards. Nathaniel rose, his face hardening into the cold mask of a killer. Tonight, he would show the Volkov family, and the world, exactly why no one was allowed to touch the people Nathaniel Blackwood cared about. Brooklyn's docks lay swallowed by darkness at midnight, with only the pale yellow glow of a few streetlights spilling onto the ink-black water. The abandoned warehouse sat at the far end of the row, an old red brick structure from the industrial boom of the early 20th century, now the den of the men who dared to kidnap the little brother of the woman Nathaniel Blackwood cared about. A convoy of black vehicles stopped 300 meters away, silent as ghosts. Nathaniel stepped out, his perfect black suit wildly out of place for what was about to happen, but he didn't care. Marcus stood at his side and handed him a handgun. Nathaniel checked the magazine, then tucked it behind his back, his gray, ice-cold gaze sweeping over the warehouse ahead. 12 men, Marcus murmured. 4 guards outside, 8 inside. The boys on the second floor, northeast corner. Nathaniel nodded. I want one alive for questioning, he said, his voice empty of emotion. The rest don't matter. 20 Blackwood gunmen moved like shadows through the night, surrounding the warehouse from every direction. The 4 guards outside were taken down in silence, throats cut before they could make a sound. Nathaniel led the main assault team, kicked the rusted iron door off its hinges, and stepped inside like death dropping from the sky. Gunfire exploded in the enclosed space, every shot precise and lethal. Nathaniel moved with a terrifying calm, dropping one man who aimed at him, dodging a bullet from the left, and answering with 2 shots to the attacker's chest. He wasn't the best shot in the group, but he was the coldest. No hesitation, no mercy. This was the other side of Nathaniel Blackwood, the side he usually hid behind expensive suits and polite smiles at high society dinners. This was the monster his father had created, the monster willing to kill without flinching to protect what belonged to him. The raid lasted less than 10 minutes. The 8 men inside lay motionless on the frigid concrete floor, blood spreading into dark pools under the beam of flashlights. Only one was still breathing, shot in the leg by Marcus and cuffed behind his back for later interrogation. Nathaniel climbed the stairs to the second floor, his footsteps thudding on rotten wood. He kicked open the door in the northeast corner and saw Noah. The boy sat on the wooden chair exactly as in the photo, hands still bound, mouth still taped, but his eyes lit up when he saw Nathaniel. Nathaniel stepped forward, gently peeled the tape from Noah's mouth, then cut the ropes. Are you hurt? Nathaniel asked, his voice softening completely compared to minutes before. I'm okay, Noah answered, his voice shaking slightly but forcing strength into it. They didn't do anything. They just threatened me. Where's Grace? She's waiting at home, safe. Nathaniel helped the boy to his feet. I'm taking you back to her right now. Noah suddenly threw his arms around Nathaniel, his small shoulders trembling. I was so scared, the boy whispered. I tried to be brave, but I was scared they'd kill me. Nathaniel went still for a moment, not used to being held like that. Then he slowly placed a hand on Noah's back. You're safe now, he said. No one can hurt you anymore, I promise. They left the warehouse, and Marcus put Noah in the car to bring him back to Grace first. Nathaniel stayed behind to interrogate the one man still alive. He crouched in front of him, gray eyes cold as the frost of hell. Who told you about the boy and the girl? Nathaniel asked. The man spat blood onto the floor and sneered. I don't know anything. Nathaniel pulled a knife from inside his jacket, slowly set the blade against the man's little finger. I'll ask again, he said calmly. And every time I hear the wrong answer, I'll cut off a finger. When I run out of fingers, I'll move to toes, then to other parts. I've got all night. Fear flashed across the man's face as he looked into Nathaniel's eyes and realized this wasn't an empty threat. All right, he screamed. A woman, she called Boss Volkov. She said she was your mother. Nathaniel froze. He heard the words, but his mind refused to process them. His mother, his own mother, had handed information to the enemy so they could kidnap an innocent 14-year-old child. What did she say? Nathaniel asked, his voice so hollow it was frightening. She said you had a weakness, the man stammered. A waitress and her little brother. She said if the boss wanted leverage on you, that was how. Nathaniel stood, turned, and walked away, leaving the man for the others to deal with. He stepped out of the warehouse, drew in the cutting cold air of the Brooklyn night, and felt something inside him die forever. He'd suspected many things about his mother, her arrogance, her selfishness, her cruelty, but he'd never believed she'd go this far. She'd been willing to let an innocent child be killed just to punish a girl who'd embarrassed her. Nathaniel pulled out his phone and called the family's lawyer. The man answered after a few rings, his voice thick with sleep from being woken after midnight. I want you to do what I told you last week, Nathaniel said coldly. Cut off my mother's access to the family assets completely. Freeze every account she's using, cancel her credit cards, and make sure she can't touch a single dollar of Blackwood money ever again. Mr. Blackwood, the lawyer hesitated. She's your mother. Are you sure? She's not my mother anymore, Nathaniel replied. From this moment on, Eleanor Blackwood is dead to me. When the car brought Noah back to their Brooklyn apartment, Grace had been waiting at the door for a long time. She rushed out and wrapped her arms around her little brother, squeezing so tight Noah had to gasp that he couldn't breathe. But Grace didn't let go. She just held him like that, tears sliding down her cheeks, her whole body trembling with relief. "I'm okay, sis," Noah whispered. "I'm okay. Nathaniel saved me." Grace lifted her head and looked at Nathaniel, standing a few steps away, still in his black suit now speckled with blood, his face exhausted, but his eyes softening as he watched the two of them. She slowly released Noah, walked up to Nathaniel, and without a single word, she hugged him. Nathaniel went still for a second. Then his arms slowly closed around her, holding tight as if he was afraid she'd disappear. They stood there in silence, in the freezing Brooklyn night, holding each other like two people who'd survived a storm. "Thank you," Grace whispered against his chest. "Thank you for saving Noah. Thank you for keeping your promise." Nathaniel didn't answer. He just held her tighter. Then he placed a hand beneath her chin, lifted her face, and under the pale yellow streetlight, he looked into her eyes, still red from crying. "I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you," he said, his voice rough with emotions he wasn't used to showing. "I've lived 36 years without truly caring about anyone, but now I can't imagine a life that doesn't have you in it." Grace looked into those gray eyes, the eyes that had once been cold as a blizzard and were now warm in a way she'd never seen before. She didn't speak. She just rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. Their first kiss was gentle and soft, not rushed, not demanding, just two lonely souls who had finally found each other. Noah stood in the doorway, watching them with a huge grin, deciding this was the perfect moment to slip inside and give them space. A year passed since that fateful night. Grace and Nathaniel were officially dating, even though they kept it quiet from the media and the public. Noah moved into a larger apartment Nathaniel bought for the two of them, even though Grace fought it fiercely at first until Nathaniel convinced her it was for Noah's safety. The Sterling kept thriving under Grace's management, becoming one of the highest-rated restaurants in New York. And Eleanor, she lived in a kind of living hell. After Nathaniel cut her off completely, word spread through high society like wildfire that she'd betrayed her own son to a rival Mafia family. No one knew the exact details, but everyone knew Eleanor had done something unforgivable, something so severe her own son had turned his back on her. The wealthy friends she used to dine with abandoned her one by one. Sophia Harrington, the first person to tell her about Grace, became the first to deny she even knew her. The exclusive clubs where Eleanor had been a member quietly revoked her status. Invitations to glittering parties stopped arriving at her mansion. Eleanor sat alone in the vast estate that now felt cold and hollow, and she didn't have enough money to keep all the staff, so she'd been forced to let most of them go. She lived off her meager personal savings, nowhere near enough to maintain the luxury she'd once considered normal. On long, sleepless nights, she stared at old photos of Nathaniel as a boy and wondered where she'd gone wrong. After 6 months drowning in alcohol and self-pity, Eleanor finally decided to see a therapist, not because she wanted to change, but because she couldn't bear the loneliness anymore. Yet those sessions slowly opened wounds she'd hidden her whole life. She spoke about a childhood with a cold mother who demanded perfection, about an arranged marriage to Nathaniel's father that she'd never truly wanted, about a fear of abandonment that drove her to control everything around her. She realized she'd treated Nathaniel the exact way her own mother had treated her, and that toxic circle had destroyed the one relationship that had ever truly mattered. Eleanor began to change, slowly, painfully. She learned to look at herself honestly, to accept fault instead of blaming others, to understand that money and status didn't give her the right to grind other people down. After a year of therapy, she decided to do the thing she feared most: ask to see Grace and apologize. She sent a handwritten letter to the Sterling, making no demands, only asking for 10 minutes to talk. Grace received the letter and hesitated for a week. She had every reason to refuse. This woman had nearly gotten her brother killed. But then she remembered what her mother had always taught her: that forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was freeing yourself from the weight of hatred. She agreed to meet Eleanor at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the curious eyes of high society. Eleanor walked in looking nothing like the arrogant woman from before. She was thinner. Her hair had gone grayer, and in the eyes that had once held nothing but contempt, there was only exhaustion and regret. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I don't deserve you hearing me after everything I've done. But I need to say this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for humiliating you at the restaurant. I'm sorry for threatening you and your brother. And I'm sorry for doing something unforgivable that nearly got Noah killed. I'm not asking you to forgive me because I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know I truly regret it. And I'm trying to become a better person, even if it's probably too late." Grace looked at the woman in front of her, and for the first time, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a woman who'd lost everything and was trying to find herself again. 5 years after that fateful night at the Monarch, Grace Blackwood sat in the familiar black Maybach, watching through the window as they pulled up to the very restaurant where everything had begun. She wasn't the anxious 27-year-old waitress weighed down by worry anymore. Now she was Grace Blackwood, Nathaniel's wife, co-owner of the upscale restaurant group called Mitchell & Sterling, a successful businesswoman respected throughout the industry. Nathaniel opened the car door for her and took her hand as she stepped out. He was still as striking and coldly handsome as the day they met, but his gray eyes were always warm whenever they landed on her. The platinum wedding band on his finger glinted under the Manhattan streetlights. Noah stepped out of the car behind them, now a tall 19-year-old in his second year at Columbia Medical School on a full scholarship. He'd achieved his dream of becoming a doctor, and Grace knew their parents were smiling from somewhere high above. And the last person to step out made anyone who remembered the old story blink in disbelief. Eleanor Blackwood, now 70, her hair completely silver, her face far gentler than the arrogant, cruel woman she'd once been. After 4 years of therapy, volunteering at support centers for abused women, and proving her change day by day, she'd slowly been welcomed back into the family, though with clear boundaries. Richard Porter, still the manager at the Monarch, nearly collapsed when he saw Grace walk in. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice trembling, "it's an honor to welcome you." Grace smiled. "A table for 4, Mr. Porter." They sat at the best table in the restaurant, the very one Eleanor had sat at 7 years earlier on that fateful night. Grace looked around the familiar dining room, remembering every corner where she'd once worked, remembering late nights when her feet ached but she still forced a smile for customers, remembering the moment she'd lifted that salmon plate and changed her life forever. "Who would have thought a plate of food dumped on someone's head could lead to all of this?" Eleanor said, her voice carrying a touch of self-mocking humor. "A family, a business empire, and a mother-in-law with better manners." Everyone laughed, including Grace. 5 years ago, she couldn't have imagined sitting at dinner with Eleanor without wanting to dump something on her again. But people could change, and Eleanor had proven it. "Grace," Noah said, "I want to raise a glass to you, for everything you've done for me, for never giving up, no matter how hard life got, and for teaching me that dignity is the most precious thing a person has. No one has the right to take it away, and you should never trade it for anything." Grace felt her eyes sting. She held Nathaniel's hand on her left, Noah's on her right, and looked at Eleanor across from her. This was her family, built from the ashes of tragedy, bound together by forgiveness and growth. Nathaniel lifted his glass. "To second chances," he said, "and to people brave enough to change." Eleanor nodded, her eyes shimmering. "And to people kind enough to give others the chance to change," she added, looking at Grace with deep gratitude. They clinked their glasses, and Grace stared into the red wine glowing in candlelight. She remembered the red wine Eleanor had poured onto her own dress 7 years ago, remembered the blatant injustice of that night, and realized life had a strange way of turning its darkest moments into the beginning of something bright. Sometimes we have to lose everything to gain everything. Sometimes we have to stand up for ourselves even when we know the consequences could be terrifying. And sometimes the people we think are our enemies become family. That's the story of Grace Mitchell, the waitress who dared to stand up for her dignity in the face of power and wealth, and who, in the end, found the happiness she deserved. My dear friend, this story teaches us that dignity isn't for sale, that people can change if they truly want to, and that life always offers second chances to those brave enough to take them. How do you feel about this story? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for your self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories from deep in your heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more moving stories every day. Wishing you and your family good health, joy, and peace. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.